Okay, you're live.
Okay,
Thank
excellent.
you.
Hello, YouTube. So, do we have Vipin?
I don't see him here yet.
Okay. So today's meeting, maybe I just start. So today's meeting, and welcome everybody back to the Capital Markets, Hyperledger Capital Markets Special Interest Group. And we have a pretty special session today, right? We have Benedict, who's going to give us an overview of Genesis, the green bonds. So I'm going to hand over to her in a moment. Firstly, I have to mention two quick things. One is this is a Linux Foundation meeting, so we have to make sure we have a code of conduct. It's pretty straightforward. You can see it. It's common sense. Diversity is very important to our community. It strengthens it. So please respect others and treat people in a civil way. I know everyone will, but it's just worthwhile saying that. We also have an antitrust code which we have to follow. So please, if you want to look at more of that, it's relatively common sense as well. Please go and have a look at our website for that. So today, I will just pass on, I think, to Benedict. We're going to be talking about green bonds. And I think Benedict's also going to talk a little bit about what's happening at BIS, the Bank of International Settlements. I have to say, they have done some amazing work. I think Karen and me and others have talked about, this is the best source of material if you want to learn about CBDCs and virtual assets. Are really, beautiful work done. So Benedict, I'm going to hand over to you now. So maybe you could present a little bit about BIS, a little bit about Genesis and the green bonds, and then we're going to go into a Q&A. And Benedict I'm here in Discovery Bay. She must be half a kilometer away. But we're both locked down, kind of.
Okay, I couldn't find my my unmute button. Sorry. Okay, I got that now. So something with the screens that whenever you want to do a presentation, it somehow overlays the screen. So anyway, I think I just managed. Sorry for this. And secondly, there might be a dog barking or some loud noises from children or otherwise. Sorry for having to put that up front. Okay, so I will introduce this morning the BIS Innovation Hub, and I will also be introducing just the Genesis project, which is our green finance project. And then I will also close out with showing you some of the payment projects that the BIS is undertaking, because at the end of the day, given we're the bank for international settlements, our key area of focus is really whether the payment system needs to be innovated, given the current evolution around payments, as you know, with so many alternatives coming up. So just to give you a little introduction to the BIS Innovation Hub, it was only founded around less than 2 years ago, and I myself have been here 1.5 years. And the idea was that we, in a systematic way, as set on this slide, focus on critical trends in technology. But it is the second bullet that is the harder one to achieve, is that we should also develop public goods in the technology space and that are of relevance to the central banking community. Now, other than that, we're obviously within our community of the BIS Innovation Hub. We serve as a focal point for innovation for the central banking community. And with a lot of our projects, we actually bring in other central banks so that they can learn alongside ourselves. So in terms of our presence, you can see it on this slide. We now have about 7 presences around the world. And if you imagine that that's from 0 2 years ago, that's actually quite a lot. Every center is staffed up with a mix of people. It tends to be a center head like myself that is either internally or externally hired. We then have a series of secondees from a central bank. In my case, that is from the HKMA. And then we have a series of assignees. These are people that we hire and that we hire according to their specializations. So my two assignees are technologists. These are people that I hired from the market and with a specific focus actually on DLT technologies. For the broader BIS, in fact, we have only 3 offices across the world. The Hong Kong office is the first rep office, and it was opened more than 20 years ago. And the other rep office is in Mexico. And obviously, the headquarters is in Basel, as I suppose each of you know. We, as mentioned, serve as a network for 63 central banks. So we work together with 63 central banks. The classic activity of the BIS was around policy setting, convening powers, and also around research, which you would all be familiar with. The Innovation Hub's focus being specific on prototype building is actually the most recent addition to this BIS family. So as mentioned, because I was asked for this presentation to zoom into green finance, I will introduce to you Project Genesis, which we led out of the Hong Kong Center and which was the first green finance prototype project of the BIS Innovation Hub globally. So the backdrop to this project was that we felt it's actually really difficult for retail investors to invest in very safe bonds, which are government bonds. That is often the case nationally, but certainly the case internationally. And so what we wanted to do is focus on building a prototype that used DLT and tokenization. And we wanted to zoom in specifically on the green bond space, because we thought that theme is very critical to society at large. And as mentioned, we wanted it to be available to retail investors, and we thought that tokenization matches actually really well with the need to fractionalize and or the ability to fractionalize, and therefore also this theme around democratization and retail investment. For context, within Hong Kong, there are bonds issued by the government for distribution to retail. There's only a few such bonds that have been done in the past, and they're actually very well received because typically the government pays a slightly higher % coupon on these bonds than you would get on a deposit at a bank. So typically what would happen in Hong Kong when any of these bonds are launched is they tend to be oversubscribed by quite large multiples. In addition to that, people will try to game the system. And what I mean with that is they will go to various banks and make a duplicate subscription so that they up their chances of getting a slice of that bond. What Hong Kong has not done in the past and has announced that it might do so this year is to distribute green bonds to retail investors. So in the past, they have been inflation-linked bonds and silver bonds. There haven't been yet a distribution of green bonds. We wanted to fit asset within this new team. And as I mentioned in passing, we also wanted to avoid this problem of duplicate subscriptions because it actually leads to a lot of inefficiencies in the current paper-based bond issuance and distribution process, because the banks need to reconcile and see whether an individual like myself would have gone around to different places to subscribe to the same bond. And obviously, this can be automated through the use of new technology. So in sum, the stack that we built in prototype format for this specific use case included the tokenization aspect, the elimination of the duplicate subscription, and also all the way to the secondary market. And again, I'll show that in more detail. Now, we started this project with a bit of a research focus. So we brought together a group of 25 global experts that contributed to this first report that you see here. And then we moved on to building these prototypes. So for first report, as said, I would just encourage you to take a look at it if you're interested in the topic. It is a very pragmatic overview of the world, you could say, of green finance from the perspective of practitioners. And these practitioners come from anywhere in the private sector, including also NGOs and not-for-profits. So, for example, the WWF contributed to this report, and also many other organizations that have been active in the context of climate change, such as, for example, the United Nations. The content of this report, to just give you a little bit of an overview, is we started with introducing the green bond wave. And as you may know, within the context of green finance, actually green bonds have been the most successful product. Now, that may change in the future, since increasingly there is now a recognition of the importance of ESG in investing broadly, including, for example, by pension funds. But around 5 years ago, when this green bond wave started, there was still very little recognition of the importance of ESG. I would say that ESG in the past year has really gone into a much faster mode, so to say. So section 1 gives you the context in some of green bonds. Section 2 then focuses on tokenization and the securities market perspective on tokenization. This perspective includes the perspective of 2 lawyers, one for primary market and one for secondary market, as well as the perspective from ASIFMA and the Securities Markets Association. We then moved on to a third big theme that often becomes a bit of an overhang when people talk about green bonds. So when people talk about green bonds, to me, it's actually a positive message. But what tends to happen is people will say, yes, but there are all these greenwashers. I think, as we all know, there's always good things and they always come with bad things. And so for the purpose of green finance, you could say the bad thing is greenwashing. What that means is people issuing financial products that they call green, but where there's ultimately no checks and balances over whether these supposedly green finance products actually achieve their green goals. So this sector sets out the importance of green auditing, and as well as the challenges within green auditing. And it also provides a sense of where DLT can help in this regard. So it then moves on, not surprisingly, to DLT and IoT. It shows how blockchain can be used as a base infrastructure for tracking of green outputs, something that we showed within the prototype that I will demonstrate to you. And this chapter, or this section of the chapter, was contributed by All-Infra, which is the exact people that have provided the DLT-based data feed for Project Genesis. We also have a chapter there on IoT, because at the end of the day, DLT might be one of the technologies, but IoT is another. And there's a lot of new monitoring technologies around negative green outputs or pollution that probably need to somehow be linked up to these kind of financial products in the future. Then we moved on to even thinking further outside the box and proposing a series of new products that actually could be developed if one thinks really wide-ranging. One is mitigation outcome securities. The idea there is that you link to a bond product the receipt of the ultimate carbon credits from the investment of that bond into new infrastructure for renewables. So this idea is actually one that we will further explore the feasibility of this year. This specific section was contributed by the United Nations. And then we continued on by ultimately the worst challenge that we will face in the next 10 to 20 years is climate accounting, because at the end of the day, for countries to agree to targets under the Paris Agreement, it will be critical that there is a way to add up whether these countries are really meeting their targets or not. And this is where I think the technology community will not only need to play, cannot only play a role, but will have to play a role, because there's frankly no way that this at this global scale can be achieved without technology. And then we ended with a bit of an alluding to the book of Genesis. And if you may know the book of Genesis, it is the first book of the Bible, and it is the time when everything was still very green. So we closed here by a little bit of an introduction on how the future could look if we got this right, and if we focused on what we now know the science says. The WWF there introduced the what ifs and asked a series of what if questions. What if people did this? What if policy setters did Y? And it leads to these future scenarios. So I said, probably this report is highly unique because it is from 25 contributors, and each of which have been longstanding warriors on the green topic. They're not people who showed up, let's say, yesterday, because now there's a lot of financial interest in this and money to be made. These are all people who have, to a large extent, actually dedicated most of the last 10 to 30 years to this cause. So in sum, now I move to the Genesis prototypes themselves. And the prototypes, actually very nice videos of them, are available on our website. And I will later show you, where to find these. But in sum, for this distributing tokenized government bonds, green bonds, to retail investors, we made two prototypes. And one prototype was built with digital assets, our DAML, and the other one was built with a consortium of Standard Chartered called the Liberty Consortium, which was a combination of Standard Chartered Bank and shareable asset. And as I mentioned, for both prototypes, the green feed was provided by All Infra, which is a startup that started actually in Hong Kong. And the co-founder is still based in Hong Kong. So to start off with the similarities between these two prototypes, and when you look at the videos that are available on our webpage, you will see the similarities. So to just tell you the similarities, it includes automated onboarding. So what these two prototypes did is they integrated a private sector app. And there are many of these apps that are now used by any of the fintech startups, where you show your face, you show your passport, you do your liveliness check, and in a few minutes, you're actually being verified. That is your identity verification. But to this specific prototype, we also wanted to add the verification versus public sector databases. So in Hong Kong, the public sector database that is still work in progress is I Am Smart. So again, both these prototypes included a very efficient private sector app-based onboarding, and both of them explored the addition of the connection to the government verification databases. And I know within your community, you're very focused on identity. Identity, to be reliable, ideally has a source of truth, and the source of truth can be government databases of identity, specifically in countries or jurisdictions that have a strong identification infrastructure. I would put Hong Kong within that. I arrived here 23 years ago, and I was given an identity card, unlike in certain places in the world where you still don't have an identity card. So we all have identity cards. We've had them for over 20 years, and they have been increasingly automated. So as long as the database behind this also automates and becomes more API friendly, which is what the efforts around I Am Smart are, then this becomes a very efficient verification feed for any fintech startups or for any applications like we are demonstrating here. Secondly, the second point of similarity between both prototypes is that they provide a full DLT-based cycle of bond issuance. In addition, they both control duplicate subscriptions by retail customers. And thirdly, they both have secondary market functionality. So I showed here one extract of one of the videos, but obviously you can start your subscription, you can invest in a bond, you can allocate a bond, then this bond will be settled, coupons can be paid, and the bonds can also be redeemed, all on the through the prototype that we have developed. And as noted, because this is about Hong Kong government bonds, in fact, this process is managed by the Hong Kong Monetary Authority. So the Hong Kong Monetary Authority is providing the approval process for this bond issuance to go ahead. Again, I would encourage you to look at the videos because they bring this much more to life. So the other similarity, as I mentioned, between these prototypes is the green transparency functionality. And as I mentioned, for this functionality, we have linked it to All Infra. What All Infra does is it tracks green data of renewable projects. So to put it very simply, if there is a wind farm or a solar farm, there are meters attached to that farm. And these meters, they track the renewable output that is being generated by those renewable farms, you could say, right? And in some, these can be registered on blockchain so that you avoid the provenance issues that blockchain in many other applications is also seeking to address. In some, you avoid that the same carbon credits are used twice. This feed was connected to both of the prototypes. And here you see the extract or the screenshot of one of the prototypes showing the green impact. You can also see this, each of the videos actually juxtaposes the view of the issuer of the bond versus the view of the investor in the bond. So here the investor has invested 50,000 Hong Kong dollars, and you can see that there is a green impact indicator right there. So the key differences between the two prototypes, so the functionalities are quite similar. The difference is the underlying blockchain. So in the case of Liberty, they decided to use the Stellar blockchain. And the Stellar blockchain was used because it actually has lower cost for transfer than exists in the case of Ethereum. The second prototype was built on, apologies, my bird is starting to make some noise, so I'll get him moved. Sorry for the screeching. Okay, the second prototype is built by Digital Asset, and it is based on permission-based blockchains using the DAML language. So quite different in the underlying technology. And both, as you must keep in mind, are prototypes. Both these prototypes sought to be fully compliant with existing rules and regulations. And achieve that through using these different blockchains. So as I mentioned, we have videos available, and I would say for this, we have 4 videos available, 2 that explain this in simple terms, like I just did, and 2 that give you the full overview or the walkthrough of the prototype. So for those who found this interesting, I would encourage that you take a look actually at these different videos. So as I mentioned, I will spend just a little bit of time also on other projects we're working on in the payment space. So within the Hong Kong Center, the biggest project we're working on in the payment space is the so-called mBridge. It is the multiple CBDC platform. To put things in context, what this really is it's obviously DLT based, but sometimes the word CBDC might be confusing. In fact, if you look at this, this is an issuance and redemption platform for national currencies, so that settlement can occur on a PVP basis. And consequently, it is indeed a CBDC platform. But if you wanted a simpler word for this, it could be a new international payment infrastructure. So what it in sum does, it allows different jurisdictions, and this is illustrated on this slide, to come onto this platform. So currently the test is going on with 4 jurisdictions: the People Bank of China, the Hong Kong HKMA, the Central Bank of the UAE, and then the Bank of Thailand. And these different central banks are on the platform and can issue and redeem tokens at the request of these participant banks, the banks in these different jurisdictions. What this does, it is actually eliminating the steps of the cross-border, of the correspondent banking infrastructure. And for those who study that, you may know that correspondent banking is an incredibly useful infrastructure. But the question is whether it can be now replaced with better infrastructure. So what I mean with extremely useful infrastructure is that in the absence of a solution like we're now thinking about building, in the absence of that, correspondent banks have served the world globally in moving money from one side of the world to the other side of the world. And as you would know as well, correspondent banks have enormous regulatory burdens, including compliance, risk, etc. So when they move money, they move it safely and they move it in compliance with rules and regulations. But obviously, because it's built on a more older road, you could say, than we're now envisioning, it can be slow and it can be costly. So slow means that it can take several days for a transfer to arrive on the other end of the world. It all really depends on how many correspondent banks are operating in the target market. Secondly, in addition to that, it also can be quite costly, and the cost is estimated that for small transfers, it can easily be up to 10%. Now, one must take that point with a slight grain of salt, because for big transfers, it is much less than that size of a percent. So the cost is really on the small transfers. And I think you probably, the participants are very familiar to what's happening in the crypto sector. And obviously, this kind of approach can be useful to cut the price of small transfers. However, for very large transfers, they must be completely compliant to not create excessive risk, including compliance risk or terrorism risk or other kinds of nefarious activity risks. Secondly, such transfers, if one does a transfer of 300 million, one wants that transfer to be done on a safe infrastructure. And so the context for central banks looking at building such new DLT-based infrastructure is really to provide that safety that the banking sector provides, while also seeking to reduce the cost and secondly, increasing the speed. So the other image here on this slide illustrates for you very simply what this is about. It is about nothing else than what you know about every day. It's about trade. It's about sending goods from one country to another, getting payment made, and get them being paid faster. So just to highlight to you that this is not the only cross-border payment on DLT project that we have going on in the BIS Innovation Hub. We have this project within the Swiss Center called Jura that just issued this report about 2 weeks ago. And we also have more projects, including, for example, in the Singapore Center, for which the report has not yet been issued. Furthermore, within the Singapore Center, we also have a payments project not built on DLT, which is Nexus, for which the blueprint was released late last year, and which will go into much deeper prototyping this year. So in sum, if you found this interesting, and if you want to learn more about the BIS Innovation Hub, I would suggest you take a look at our website. If you click on Teams, you will get to this view, this specific page view. And if you click on each of these tiles, you will be able to see all the projects that we got ongoing on each of these teams. So anyway, I hope that was helpful, and I will stop it here.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Benedict. A lot of material there. So much to cover such a short period of time. Thank you very much. And also, as we're on Hyperledger, I will mention the fact that I know for the DAML that we used Hyperledger Bezier and Hyperledger Fabric, and I know the Enbridge as well was running on Hyperledger Bezier. But here we're kind of agnostic to the technology, but it's great that we'll give concepts for DLT. So now we're going to go to Q&A, right? And I know a lot of people told me they want to ask questions. Now I've got to pull them out. So Vipin, do you have anything? So actually, maybe Vipin, I think we should get Vipin and maybe David, who have both been very much involved in coordinating this meeting today, right? There's Vipin. Vipin's with his beautiful flowers in New York. So what do they call those flowers again? I've forgotten. They're
wisteria.
Wisteria. From Central Park.
The mysterious wisteria.
And David in sunny central Hong Kong. So Vipin, do you have any specific questions? And anyone, please, just speak up, or maybe put your thumb up or question, or put a question in the chat, and let's start. We have Benedict here. Great opportunity.
Yes. One of my first questions is about the infrastructure you built for green bonds. A lot of the parameters, a lot of the attributes, a lot of the flow is similar to other bonds. I mean, there are differences in the green bond space, especially the provenance, the all infra, auditing, that kind of stuff. But can there be a way in which we can build this so that we can create, let's say, regular sovereign bonds with variations, like green bonds will have these differences, parameters, other bonds will have other parameters, because we are trying to create this kind of a, this kind of a generic infrastructure for different kinds of bonds. What is your opinion on that?
Okay, so in fact, the DAML technology, as you know, is specifically geared towards making the distribution of bonds of any sort automated through the use of DLT and tokenization. So on DAML's side, that is the core, one of the core areas of focus. So as part of the basic suite of DAML products, you can issue these bonds. So you might recall on one of the slides I showed the bond issuance, right? So this is quite standard to DAML, and obviously DAML is not the only one. There are various other of these tokenization platforms like Securitize, for example. So the tokenization itself of bonds, I think, is not novel. So and we were fully aware of that, and that's what we wanted, because you don't want everything to be novel in what you do, because then you can't achieve your end goals. So the two novel aspects, you could say, of this prototype are that it was geared towards a Hong Kong government bond issuance, and B, that it involved green bonds. You could say the retail aspect was also novel in the context of a government bond, but of course it's less novel in the context of tokenization more generally. Yeah, and so as you mentioned, to try and link up this green feed, that's where a lot, as I mentioned, if countries really have to fulfill their obligations under the Paris Agreement, there will need to be a lot more of these measuring technologies, or a lot more of the linking up of these measuring technologies to the issuance of financial products, including bonds.
Two more follow-ups. One is, do you follow any standards Are there such standards in the market today? Second is, obviously, it's not just issuance. You have to follow the bond through its entire life cycle, settlement, payments of coupons, maturing and retiring of the bonds. So all of that is also part of the whole flow of the bond. So in that sense, have you looked at that, or?
Yeah.
Meaning,
I think obviously these are prototypes, and as you know, with the prototype, you're not studying a production ready system. And just for context, if we needed to look at production ready, the cost would have been about 10 times the cost of doing a prototype. So there is a reason why people first do prototypes, because it is a limited exercise with a limited cost label, and it can then show or demonstrate whether this can be explored for actual production ready, right? So some of the questions you ask about ultimately the late life cycle, you could say, of a bond. Worst case, there could be a bankruptcy. Now, with us, that's very unlikely because it's a government bond. So again, we controlled for the difficulty of these questions. But surely I can say I haven't studied into how well these tools can be used for restructuring of a bond. So one of the reasons why bonds are oftentimes, specifically corporate bonds, are still very much OTC products is in part because of these complications that might come up, like bond restructuring. So yes, I have not stress tested these systems for that.
Yeah, I mean, the standards question was the other one, because I see Money on this call. He has built we had built, complete system for Ethala, for example, where we followed IWA standard, and Money also built a settlement platform based on CDM, which is a standard used for life cycle. So the life cycle usually of swaps and derivatives, but can be repurposed for a bond, because usually it's a series of payments or something like that, depending on the coupon. And there are some other integrations, like, you have to observe certain interest rates out in the wild, and then try to, if it's a spread over LIBOR or some other index or whatever it is. Anyway, I don't want to dwell on this because there are people who want to ask questions. There's somebody named Cliff who seems to have his hand up, so I don't want to take up all the time.
Cliff from Sydney. Cliff, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Julian?
Yeah, do you want to ask a question?
Yes, I do have two questions to Benedict. It's quite a brilliant presentation. Nice to know this a great POC there by BIS. So my first question is that for this green bond project, from payment point perspective, would the cryptocurrency being considered as the part of the payment in the future? The second question was the moving forward, any more information can be shared for BIS future plan to coverage on the whole ESG area. Thank you.
Yeah, so firstly on the payment side, so that was also part of the prototypes, is and it's covered in 2 prototype reports. So I sent to you the link, I put it in the chat here, the link to the 2 videos, but there's also there the link to the report. And you can see that both prototypes explain how they linked up with the payment system. Now, both prototypes also concluded that it would be much easier if there were either stablecoin or CBDC in the process. So for now, the idea was, let's just assume there is no CBDC. So let's just assume that the system must be somehow connected to the currently existing payment system, like the FBS system, and that was feasible. Actually, it was viewed to be more than feasible. Actually, it's really feasible. But it was also viewed that for the payment, for example, of the coupons, and specifically when the coupons are in very small amounts, which they will be invariably if you fractionalize a bond to our target, which was 100 Hong Kong dollars per person, then to have these other payment mechanisms will be what is probably more efficient. So we were looking at stable coins more than cryptocurrency for this purpose.
Sure.
Yeah. And then the second question, in terms of what else we will be doing. So this year, as said, we will do an extension of Genesis called Genesis 2.0. So we will relabel this one as 1.0. And for 2.0, we will be looking into mitigation outcome securities, i.e. Having the carbon credits that are outputs from an invested project to actually vest directly to the bondholders. That is one thing we will be doing. As said, it is described in the paper, in the chapter contributed by the United Nations. But secondly, we also have a new center starting in the Euro system. And that center is very keen on covering more green topics. Now, they haven't defined their project suite yet. So until they define it, we will need to wait and see what their focus is. Separately, within Singapore, they're focused on a subtech project, a reporting project that is called ELIPS, and it was focused on mortgages and creating common data standards across central banks. And it will now pivot towards a focus on ESG and green data. And all of these things are announced. So, of course, I'm not disclosing confidential information. So if you look for our work program for 2022, it was just announced about 2 weeks ago. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Benedict, for the great information shared. Thank you again.
Thank you, Cliff, for the question. And now I'm going to call in and Santanu, who's put his hands up, who's from Mindtree, one of our members. So Santanu, do you want to ask a question or a couple of questions?
Thank you, Julian. It was a tremendous, excellent session. I really felt grateful. My first question is why DAML has been considered for the project 2, and my second question is some thoughts if you can share. Just 1 or 2 lines regarding Nexus project.
Okay, so the Nexus project I want to opine on because it's really handled by the Singapore Center, and since I have a lot on my plate myself with Enbridge, and we actually have 2 retail CBDC projects I didn't talk about, and an SME project and Genesis. I frankly don't even follow too much in detail. So your question on Nexus, I would suggest you can pose it to the Singapore Center. As to why DAML, in fact, for every of these projects that we undertake, we do an RFQ process or a request for quotation. And we felt that on the balance of what we needed for this project, and keeping in mind the set that we did need the bond issuance unit of this, we felt that DAML was quite a good match.
Thank you.
And actually, we're going to have another session with Karen, who's here from Digital Assets and others. We're going to go into the detail, because it is a proof of concept, so nothing's secret, right? So we can go into the real depth of how, and that's the other benefit of POC, right? We're going to go into the nuts and bolts of how that worked, how they pulled Besu and Fabric together in the same implementation. So that's for another session soon. I'm going to pass. I think David, I know you were eager to ask a few questions. Should I hand it over to you, David, now? And anybody else, please put your hand up if you want to ask.
Well, I would say that I noticed that my by now ex-staff who worked on this project is seemingly dialed in. So, David, if you ask difficult questions, you can target them right at Marcel.
Yes, I saw Marcel was on earlier on. Hi, Marcel. Are you well, my friend?
Yeah. Hi. Thanks for having me.
That's never a problem. Never a problem. So I've got two questions, but I'll ask the first one. Then maybe if there's anyone else from the audience who wants to ask a question. So obviously with green finance, one of the critical things for me is obviously about rules, laws, regulations. But another big part is about financial inclusion. Surely, though, if we look at what green bonds are going to do, if you're already in the capital market sector, you're already an investor, then all you're doing, this is just another asset. Isn't this just another asset that you can invest in? How will green bonds really drive up financial inclusion? Because of, say, if you're in the retail sector already, you can buy a bond. How can green bonds really help people who are maybe not well served outside of financial inclusion? What can green bonds do for them? Because ultimately, as we all know, they could be the societal sector that's also mostly impacted by the impacts of things not being green.
Yeah, you're asking a really difficult question because so I'll answer in two ways, one with supply chain and one with these mitigation outcome securities. So the reason why the UN is focused on mitigation outcome securities is because a lot of the projects, the difficulty really is to get funding. So let's say I want to build a solar farm or a wind farm, and let's now assume it's a medium size. It requires a significant amount of capital, and it's very hard to raise that capital, right? So the UN's position is that if you give the bond investor the exposure to the carbon credits, then the product becomes more interesting than just a simple bond. So for Genesis 1, we piloted a simple bond, you could say, right? And the reason we did that is because as I mentioned at the beginning, Hong Kong government bonds are very in demand. It doesn't actually matter, that the coupon is 1%. 1% is still higher than 0.2 at the bank. But if you look at it on a global level and you say, okay, you want to get financing over to renewable projects, it's incredibly hard. And so in sum, having that mitigation outcome security aspect might make it more accessible to raise funding for renewable projects. Now, where does that link to financial inclusion? Is that point I just made is particularly relevant in the view of the UN for emerging markets. So because there it's even harder to raise capital for such projects. And if you put things within context, I mean, I'm obviously not an expert on this matter, but if you think about where more land is available or more sun is available, I would think it's in a lot of these places. So you have the places where you have the place, but you don't have the financing. So in sum, that's why we're thinking about exploring this mitigation outcome security idea. However, on the second point, I think if you really talk about grassroots financial inclusion, then you're thinking, and I mean, you mean with that, I mean, I'm going to assume what you mean with that. So, for example, if I'm a farmer in a remote country, let's say in Africa, and I do organic farming, currently I cannot build up my credit history because none of my invoices are in DLT format or in traceable systems. So in sum, I live in the cash economy. I get cash for my organic farming, and I don't really build up a credit history that enables me to borrow more money so I can do a bigger organic farm. So in that sense, I think that is probably the more directly relevant area of financial inclusion to your question. And that, I think, will be achieved through supply chain transparency. And that only will link itself up in the end to green bonds, I think, when companies start issuing these green bonds specifically in order to green their supply chains and specifically to roll out the technologies that it takes to green that supply chain. I definitely think we're in very early stages of this, but I do think it's definitely something that you would want to see. So for context, when I first looked at DLT, one of the things I really fancied was a startup that was creating transparency around diamonds. And diamonds are, as you know, quite an interesting product because we all want it, but there is an enormous amount of slavery in the process, child labor in the process. And these type of diamonds, which might be on your own ring, are kind of referred to as blood diamonds. So to trace blood diamonds, you can reverse it by making the supply chain transparent. And that concept was around already at the onset of DLT. So we're talking now around 2015, when DLT started spreading from its original Bitcoin application to broader applications. And I think that's what we will see now more broadly applied to supply chains. And I do wonder if we will get to an outcome where literally you walk in a supermarket and you can scan the product and you can see the green label it has. Now, and maybe all the way to where it was farmed from. I really don't think that's so far out of a future. I think that will be our future within 20 years, if not within 10 years. And as part of that, I said the end point is that the farmer's credit is now being traceable. And when the farmer's credit is traceable, you can get more of that better green and organic activity. So again, in fact, these are all linked topics. It's just that if you talk financial inclusion, I normally mean people who really are excluded. And that's where I think this is relevant.
No, excellent. I agree, and very much that down the line you could see where an organic farmer not only benefits from the selling of the actual product, but can benefit from putting that extra capacity that they've generated by doing green farming, and could use that as like carbon credits to sell that in a secondary market as well. So I think that ultimately will be very good. I did have another question, but I'm going to concede the floor to Angela.
Angel, and also there's Elizabeth as well, who's asked a question on the Elizabeth Green. So Angel, who's from, you're on mute. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Two questions. One is about the cost benefit side of this project and what you guys, can you provide a little bit of insights on what is driving the 50% reduction in the origination phase? You know, what are the big drivers there? And then the second part, if you guys have thought about or talked about the implementation stage, right? Taking this to the next step. Is it an incremental approach? Do you start in a functional area? Do you start on the back end, or do you go big bang? Thank you.
Yeah, I think that Karen has put her hand up, and maybe she can answer your first question on where the cost reduction is most prevalent. In terms of me answering the second question, look, I work, as said, for the BIS, which is an organization of 63 member central banks. And as you may know, central banks move, their key focus is safety. So they're not going to move incredibly fast. And it's the same actually with governments in general. So with this project, our key target was really to show what is possible. And we think it will, we in some roadshow these things to our member central banks, which are 63 of them. Not every central bank, by the way, plays a role in the government's bond distribution. That tends to be country dependent, but quite some do. And I'm sure that this will sow the seeds for innovation to take place. Now, to answer it simply, I don't think it will be implemented overnight. It will take a little bit of time. And so in that regard, we are slightly different from also a private organization. To your question on cost benefit, we are not we are not under commercial pressure to put it into practice right away. So the beauty is we can show the path to implementation, and we can spread the gospel. Yeah, and I think eventually we'll go into this direction anyway, but it's maybe not tomorrow. Karen?
That's a great question. I think the cost benefits needs to be studied for every of the projects, like for enterprise blockchain to take place, or a public version of that because without cost benefits, I think technology is interesting for technology's sake. And to answer back your question, the 50% reduction is driven by the efficiency. So that's the time. We think that the time span for origination can be cut down significantly from around 2 months to 1 month. And a lot of that is already covered by Benedict's earlier sharing. It's because during this retail subscription in Hong Kong currently, the government wants to ensure it's heavily oversubscribed. So government wants to ensure that government does want to ensure that each citizen has its fair share. So that's why there has been a lot of checks that are required, and the synchronization for that's by having a common data set and the synchronization between all the banks that we will be able to eliminate the double, not the double spend here, but the double subscription. And in terms of the exact dollar amount, we also went quite aggressive to estimate, and we estimate around 18 basis points benefits that can be realized. Some of that, I have to say, it's driven by automation. Either you can do it in a DLT system, or you can also realize that through a centralized system. However, with the DLT, it opens up for a lot of new use cases and also potentially an interconnected networks. So we can marry the primary issuance and secondary issuance and also build up different use cases on top.
Okay.
I hope that answers your question, or
Yes.
need to elaborate.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Great presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, and thanks, Angel, for being up so late. I know it's late there.
He's not that late compared to me.
All right, sorry. Or Karen. So you're the midnight crowd, right? He's the late evening crowd, the LA crowd, I think.
Yeah, I think the time has happily come to a close with a beautiful presentation by Benedict. Thank you so much. So, Julian, you should take over. And
okay, so I'll quickly wrap up, right? Actually, and any other questions? Maybe we'll just get one question. Neil, I see Neil has raised his hand. Neil, do you want to quickly ask a question? I don't know how much.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. This is Neil from the New York area. I have a question on Project BIS. It says upcoming on the site. I just want to know, do you know when it's going to start, and are you able to give a preview? I know we're up on time, so if you want to catch up separately, that's fine, but I wanted to get some context to what the scope of this is.
Okay, so I actually don't have detail on this project because it's not within my center. So yeah, I don't think I'll be able to enlighten you today on that one.
Right. So
Okay,
except now I remember. I think that is the new name of Ellipse. So that's what I said. It's Ellipse is pivoting from mortgage data to ESG data.
I see.
But
And where do I
as I said,
look up
that's
Ellipse?
out of the Singapore center.
Okay, sorry, I may have missed that Ellipse because I joined a little late. Is that on your site to look up?
Yeah, so Ellipse is definitely on the website under Subtech. So and it was formulated as a project to standardize data requests on mortgages across central banks so that you could aggregate the data And the latest is that they are looking at using some of the learnings from the prior prototype to the ESG space. And I think the new name you mentioned is in some the new name of that Ellipse, or the extension of the Ellipse project.
Okay, thank you. That helps. I'm able to access that document
Yeah.
now, so I'll go through that. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Neil. Thank you everyone for your questions. Right. Thank you, Benedict, for an amazing conversation. I think we could have had a 5-day seminar on this. But we've done it all in an hour. So I think we will have many things to follow up. Everyone, thank you for speaking. If you're watching this on YouTube, we have our links down below. So please join the mailing list. We now do have a LinkedIn special interest group, capital market special group LinkedIn. So please connect to that as well. Yeah, take care, everyone. Look after yourself and keep safe. And thank you again, definitely, Benedict, for an amazing presentation. Very much appreciated. Thank you for sharing today.
Great. Take care.
Thank you. Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.